In the West, we are treated to a plethora of lies. However, one of the most sinister lies we are treated to is the lie of access, a lie that is founded upon several toxic presuppositions, and makes several incredible viral claims as a result. This lie is based on several concepts, such as radical individualism, denial of heritage, deconstruction of the nation, and the sole existence of private property, as in there is only private property. The final and most sinister point of all of this is the mental gymnastics required to assert that reasons for committing an action dictate the morality of that action. All of this comes together to form the crux of one of the greatest lies and manipulations that the masses are subjected to in the 21st century. One that was manufactured and propagated purposefully to destroy the nations of the world and of Europe in particular. This lie first requires a susceptible populace, one that is tired, apathetic, and disinterested in their own survival. This makes the urban sprawl of major cities a perfect hunting ground for this particular mental virus. We see it everywhere we go, from hipsters and their soy lattes to the vast majority of childless women who have no investment in the fate of the nation, and, in fact, could not care less. The lie usually starts innocent, by asserting a certain type of radical individualism, not following the crowd, being a rebel, and ultimately that you are but an atom and that you should remain an atom, that you have no responsibilities or duties to society at large, or even those you proclaim to love. The lie of access is first and foremost founded upon a radical individualism, or the complete detachment from each other, the idea that no matter what we do or think, we are fundamentally acting as isolated units. However, whenever pressed on the issue, even the most radical of individualists will acknowledge that we, through our everyday actions, are in fact affecting each other. They will usually downplay this unless the action is remarkably serious, such as murder, theft, arson, or any other crime that directly affects a person. However, this is far-fetched and can be disproven by simply demonstrating how an ever greater scaling down of actions leads to less of an effect directly, but by proxy, society indirectly. If one was to cheat on his wife and convince another married woman to cheat as well, that is already two families that are affected, and that also affects the social circles of those families as well. As this news will prompt a response from all these people, the ripple will simply spread. Or how about something less obvious, such as hoarding money, or poor behavior in public, walking nude in your own backyard? All these, while seemingly not directly harmful, are in fact affecting society, your local environment. Everything we do does. Sunbathing nude in your own backyard is inviting hungry eyes to take a gander, a point of jealousy and contention and conflict. A man hoarding money for the sake of hoarding money, while he may be absurdly wealthy, will inevitably ultimately deprive his family of necessary things to live fulfilling lives. It ruins his character and reduces the flow of funds through the economy. The rude behavior of one exhibits in public causes people to lose trust in the capacity of society to maintain itself, causes them to feel less safe and connected. All these actions have a direct and indirect effect, thus proving that we are all interconnected to some degree, and that this degree is always somewhat meaningful. As such, it stands to reason that the concept of radical individualism is fundamentally broken, and will lead to fundamentally broken and fractured societies. This idea of radical individualism is the spearhead that attacks the concept of any group, be it religious, ethnic, or family group. There is nothing that can escape the gaze of radical individualism, which, while at the same time absolving one of any duty to the group, at the same time asserting that the individual is untouchable. However, even liberals have morals, and as such, the rule they settle on is simply the concept of do no harm directly. Since it is impossible to predict if you can do harm indirectly, it makes sense to stick to the concept of direct harm. However, this rule only pertains to individuals and does not pertain to groups. As such, groups fundamentally have no rights in this model of society and can be violated at will. This has then led to what I like to call the attack on the nation. This is quite a real attack and it is brutally vicious. However, there is no blood or direct harm that I can point for evidence of this event. However, I can point to the entirety of the West and Europe as evidence of this, and its subtle ethical genocide. Under the umbrella of radical individualism, this genocide is in fact ethical or moral. Air quotes. Since the group has no fundamental rights, if the actions of individuals to simply mix with others or not have children, including aborting those children, then it is not genocide, since it is just individuals doing what they want. It is not murder, because it is just individuals doing what they want. It is not wrong, because it is causing no direct harm to anyone. This has caused a shift in the concept of the nation. The nation is no longer something that you are. It is not a state of being, inherent and immutable. Nobody's born French, nobody's born American, and nobody's born Polish. One does things that are arbitrarily defined as being French, Polish, or American. This is a fundamental shift in our understanding of the nation, as it no longer is something exclusive, is not something that is hereditary. Rather, it is something that is acquired, something that is learnt, something that is strictly artificial. Even radical individualism erodes even this concept, as it is too exclusionary, and instead simply reduces the nation to a piece of paper that one owns. A citizenship, a little something called a passport. This is a stage many of us know as tolerance, and permission of any and all to do as they please as long as it's not hurting anyone. Hurting, in air quotes. All this because they're just individuals seeking a better life. Then again, aren't we all? The denial of the nation as a concept grounded in reality ultimately results in the denying that nation rights to its institutions, its public space, its borders, and establishes that the nation is simply a place governed by a ruling body, a state that happens to carry the name. For example, Germany. This, of course, is a horrible and moral perspective, and since it means that there is no concept of heritage at all. In particular, collective heritage, which means that there is no collective ownership to a plethora of institutions, and that someone born in a country that was made and watered by the blood of his forefathers has to wait in line just like everyone else. He has no right to his homeland and no priority in his institutions. This view in and of itself is fundamentally immoral, as the nation, the state, and its institutions were made and brought to life by a certain group of people for the interests and good of that specific group of people. As such, these people are inheriting these institutions and have a fundamental moral right to them, and may not be denied them or control of them. To deny this will ultimately mean a denial of all heritage, even at the individual level, as one cannot consistently deny this concept of collective heritage without analogously comparing it to individual heritage. If heritage, a concept determined by blood and who worked for what, is no longer a concept bound by those rules, that means the concept in itself is meaningless and cannot be applied. As such, there is such a thing as collective heritage, and nations will not be denied this, as it is an immoral act to do so. In fact, it is an act of overt oppression. Having denied the concept of heritage, we see the next fundamental shift that the live axis brings to the discussion, and that is appealing to radical individualism to deny the state's capacity as a representative body of the nation and for the nation to stop migrants from entering the nation. Oftentimes, and count how many times have you seen articles or people saying what I'm about to say here. If he is coming to work, then what's the problem? He's not hurting anyone. What's the problem? What if I want to employ only migrants? What's the problem? My property, I can do what I want with it, right? These, of course, violate the above moral right of a nation to its heritage. However, these questions and demands all stem from the idea of radical individualism and coalesce in the idea of the right to migrate. However, what many get wrong is that while there is a right to leave one's country, as it is a fundamental human right, there is not and never has been a right to enter another country, regardless of how well-meaning you are. This is because nations have a right to determine who may enter their borders and control their collective property or heritage. The left likes to skirt around this by simply derailing the discussion into one versus of private versus public property, asserting that while you can forbid someone from entering your home, that you cannot forbid him from participating in using public property that they assume, pays taxes for. You cannot forbid him from walking the streets or using public latrines. This is, however, again assuming that the migrant was already allowed into the country, and is a method by which one denies one a heritage of institutions and public space. This is fundamentally immoral, and the only ones with the right to public streets, to public institutions, are those with a heritage claim to those institutions and to those streets. And it is these people that have a claim to the collective territory that they inhabit. This is not a case of money, it is not a case of taxes, it is a case of heritage. Since a nation is something formed by blood, and it is their ancestors that built the state and its territory for them to enjoy and live in as they please, it is also their right to deny anyone entry for any reasons into their collective property. These can be reasons of race, reasons of belief, or past actions, be they criminal or benign. This is a fundamental right of nations. It is a moral right of nations to do so, and as such the exercising of this right is always fundamentally moral. If a right is not moral at all times of exercising it, then it is not a fundamental right. This is in itself refutes the entirety of these lists of arguments, that one has a right to enter, a right to go wherever he pleases, and completely destroys the concept of public property as anarchic, that it is fundamentally without an owner. The final pillar of the lie to access is the concept that your reasons for taking action, for doing something, for exercising a right, can make that action fundamentally immoral. And so we are posed with a significant question that is in fact a core question derived from the concept that intention can change the nature of an action. The basic premise is simple. If I run into a building to save a child, I am doing good. However, if I do so only because I believe I will be famous and in the news, then I am doing wrong? Can the act of saving a child be wrong because I'm doing it for inherently selfish reasons? Or rather, is my reasoning completely separate from the action's morality itself? Can I give to charity for fame and have my actions of charity be considered immoral? I would argue that this is not the case. Much like in the case of rights, actions are moral or immoral, objectively, regardless of the reasoning behind them. This idea seeks to undermine the concept of inherently moral rights, of generally rights in general. A right cannot be right if exercising said right is immoral, or in fact evil, such as the right to deny someone entry into my country or even my home. Is this immoral simply because I don't like how that person looks? Or do I have the right to do so for any reason, since it is an inherent right I have? And to violate my ability to enforce this right would be to strip me of this right. It is my position that this is the case, that to claim that my reasoning is immoral, and therefore my exercising of that right is immoral, is in fact immoral, as it denies me my inherent rights. This applies both to individual and collective rights. This also pertains to actions which cannot be made immoral based on the reasoning behind them. If I save a life because I am a spy trying to fit in, if I do good for nefarious reasons, the reasoning means nothing, as I am still by definition doing good. To claim that reasoning affects actions is to claim that there is no moral or immoral actions, simply moral or immoral reasoning. This then leads to a worldview and a set of ethics based solely on one's capacity to rationalize something into being good or evil, something the left desperately wants. As this is a slippery slope that ultimately means that if I murder someone but I had good intentions, that I did something good. Look at punch a Nazi memes going around, or hashtags. This is of course nonsensical. A quick summary of the points made, and the steps that the lie of access goes through in order to disarm the target population. 1. A stable, safe, weak urban population. 2. Introduction and consolidation of radical individualism, the deconstruction of the concept of the nation, denial of group rights based on radical individualism, and the stigmatization of discrimination. 3. Denial of collective heritage and ownership of public spaces, institutions, and territory. 4. Questioning whether or not actions are moral based on their reasoning, establishing that it is in fact the reasons that make the actions moral or not, further demonizing discrimination and the capacity by which to enforce a group concept, a group coherence. These points in themselves are in fact weak. However, their refutation takes time, and they are usually presented in ways that make them impervious or even impossible for quick identification and refutation. They are subtle, taking the face of a refugee child in an advertisement, or advertisements that have mixed race, elaborate and complex propaganda campaigns such as the white helmets, or media government leftist collusion at the national level. You can see this in many feminist movies that are coming out, like the 007 that has recently been turned into a black female, or Ariel, who has been turned black, even though it's a Dutch fairy tale, or Danish. I'm sorry. This is never present in discussions with liberals, that we are in fact as a society in accepting and functioning based on these presuppositions and have accepted these arguments as truth. We have accepted their fundamental pillars, and how are we supposed to argue? It is no wonder then that this toxic life axis has become so virulent, that so capable of infecting society, that it has spread throughout the ranks of weak men and lonely women suffering from Carrer's disease. However, there is a way to fight it, and that is to, one by one, reject its premises, reject its presumptions as flawed and fundamentally immoral, reject the left's worldview of humanity as fundamentally flawed, detached from reality, and in itself immoral, and ultimately to reject the selfish mode of thought that has been taught to us and to the masses, and to embrace our duties as men and women of a nation to become better people and to strive for greatness. May God bless you. Sława. I have been Bogatyr Bogumir, and I hope you have a great day. Pozdrawiam.